Hey guys, I'm Matt Lighty, and we're going to talk a little bit today about corrupting fever and how you could build it a couple ways, because it is on one of the prospects, and there's been some discussions in like Discord and the comments and videos about it, and how it isn't as good as it used to be, which is true, but you can build it pretty fucking good, and there's a couple of fun avenues you can actually build it in a variety way that isn't necessarily the straightforward approach. I have slapped together an absolute dickhead character that is wearing just random dog shit. I mean, like, this wand has spell damage. I'm wearing a Devotos, a shield that does nothing because I'm not even Warcrying at the moment, a tabby. You know, I'm gonna 4-link, like, this is way under what you would be doing. I only put in, what is it, 80-something passive points. And these clusters don't do anything because I'm not Warcrying. It's just like your basic res stuff. What would be like a very standard fizz dot kind of tree. And I just wanted to show you what the damage even looks like, you know, with a setup such as that, just on a 4-link. This is a 4-link corrupting fever. Yeah, this one looks... Sure, there you go. Just to show you the damage. Now we're just focusing on the damage here because that's what's kind of in question in the most basic format. I have a full Atlas tree active. Again, my res is all in the negatives, and this is just a 4-link corrupting fever that I think is level 21, but with no additional anything, and we're missing 2 supports. So normally you'd have like another support and empower. So realistically, it's like vertical level is kind of like 17 or 18 maybe, all things considered. We have the CF active, and just to showcase, the damage is still beyond ample to do any sort of mapping. When it comes to like clear, it's perfectly fine. You have the 4-link being, or the 5, sorry, I've just been frozen. The 5-link being, or 4-link, sorry, which is like GMP, returning proj, corrupting fever, and then, or no, I'm confusing myself here. Kinetic Blast, Life Tap, GMP, Returning Procs. That's the 4-link. And then you... Oh my god. I'm sneezing. Holy shit. I'm getting an allergy attack. Alright, Returning Proj, Kinetic Blast, Life Tap, GMP. That's your 4-link. And then Corrupting Fever is... I have it just linked to Swift Affliction, Brutality, Efficacy. Obviously this is Awakened, but this is level 1. So, and I'm 2 supports down. You do enough damage to kill packs. That's really the only concern when it comes to that, because your single target's going to be a 5-link Reap, which is always going to be great, so that's not in question, whatever. And you probably get an amount of life on hit, which makes it, like, feel, you know, better to do this sort of thing for. Yeah, Hemophilias take care of all your, like, additional clear. Playing a Gladiator, it's built in, but you have enough bleed from this plus the thing just to pop. So you're like, your damage can basically get carried clear-wise when it comes to that. And that's fine. So that's like the traditional route of using a wand to do like the GMP returning proj KB setup. But that's just like route 1 for CF. There's a couple other goofy routes that get like really weird when it comes to automating stuff. And one of them is extremely expensive in trade, but legally you can pull it off, and that is a Corrupting Cry Shaco. Now, I don't expect anybody to be snagging one of these fuckers in SSF. However, through this, you could do some goofy things, because Corrupting Cry does work when it comes to automating Corrupting Blood, but they made it worse for 2 reasons. Reason 1, you can't put your Warcry on left click, so if you want it to be automated, you have to run a auto exertion setup, which means you're down a link, and this now gets a reservation cost for being a pseudo aura, which is a whole other avenue of annoying, which is really annoying. So if you wanted to do an automation setup with this, right, the General's Cry, 216% reservation. Now, I'm no big city lawyer, but there's no way in hell I could ever reach 216% reservation to auto-exert this setup. So, we can't auto-exert it, which means we have to then manually General's Cry. I can't even think of a less enticing thing than manually General's Crying, because that fucking sucks. So when you General's Cry, right, in this setting, with the Shaco or the 35 Corrupting Cry setup, it's applying Corrupting Blood in a kind of super, super highfalutin fashion to everything around you. Now, there's a couple things you could do to make this a little bit less shitty. You could put a lot of, Warcry stuff in, healing you and that sort of thing. It makes Warcrying a little bit better, but you're still manually casting a war... Oh, I died. When you Warcry, yeah, it's applying that to whatever's around you, but it's just like so fucking jank. The damage is actually much better because it's just a higher level of Corrupting Cry, therefore the Warcry that it does is just leads to more damage from the dot, but it's just so fucking jank because, yeah, you're having to do this per pack. It's kind of like playing Discharge if it's a dot. So that version, I think, kind of died, honestly, when they made the auto-exertion change what it is, because in no scenario am I going to be walking around every pack Generals Crying to kill everything. It just feels kind of poopy. Okay, so then we get to another avenue of Corrupting Fever, and that's utilizing the Hidden Blade, which is a Heist Hero Case exclusive to trigger Unseen Strike every half second while phasing. So then, okay, how do we phase? You've got the obvious route one, get Mage Blood, put on Flask, that makes you phase. Sure, you could do that. Or you could just link Phase Run to Automation with Life Tap, but then the uptime, because you don't have Frenzy Charges generating, isn't exactly 100%. So how would you get the phase run duration higher? So how do we generate Frenzy Charges passively? Well, that actually brings us back to Warcry. Auto Exertion plus General Cry, although really not useful in the case of the Corrupting Fever automation, can be used as a way to trigger medium clusters that do generate an amount of charges. But we don't have enough power to actually keep it going. So how do we get the power going? Then you have the Red Blade Banner. Now, Red Blade Banner does give us infinite power for a Warcry and increased CDR to a degree. So what that yields is a 6-second phase run with infinite power that gives us infinite Frenzy Charges through our infinite Warcries and lends it to a scenario where we have mostly uptime on phase run. Now, is that good enough for this? Well, I could actually invest in duration to a degree, and that would resolve that, or maybe even running Blood Rage. But this just lets us effectively automate the Hidden Blade setup. Now, if you knock the phase run from a 3-link to a 4-link, tacking on increased duration, then the duration of the phase run gets super long, gives you a much larger time to build up Frenzy Charges that are being automated through your mob mentality. Then the Red Blade Banner's infinite power lets us actually bypass the need for any wait. And the downtime basically gets, totally ignored, and your uptime of phase run is damn near 100%. So, do you actually need the Red Blade Banner, or can you just run something else? Without the power from the Red Blade Banner, and with the 10 power minimum from the Mastery, it isn't enough in a place without mobs to sustain the amount of charges you would have to keep phase runs uptime at 100%. But with the Red Blade Banner, if you're not going to be manually casting it, it does have enough uptime that you're just kind of chilling with the Corrupting Blood going off. Now, when it comes to Corrupting Fever, can we sustain the amount of life needed to keep Corrupting Fever active from our abilities such as the automation and the General's Cry? The answer is no, you can't. 46 life per cast, 2 times per 8-second interval at a 5 second CDR, so it's at 10.38 seconds per 46 life, which is about 80-something life per CF being active, isn't enough to keep it up. You have to do something else. Now, typically, I don't want to do something else, but if I have to do something else, that's where the reaping comes in. So periodically reaping for single target becomes your alternative method of doing whatever you're trying to do. The problem is performing anything, any action that you do that isn't phase running, basically replaces the buff with one that boosts your melee damage, right? So if I'm walking along, then it's hidden blading. And if I get to something or to attack, the phase run's going off instantly. It's not going to stay on me because the phase run's being eaten by me performing a skill. In which case, I'm no longer hidden blading. But the hidden blading, in a map is funny because it's targeting and hitting so many things so frequently, and you're phasing, so things are just kind of dying around you and exploding, and you're walking through all the shit because the entire time it's going down, you're phasing, so you're not exactly being hit. You're kind of intangible for the bulk of the... That being said, you have to be periodically hitting your Corrupting Fever, which is a skill, but it seems to eat your phase run, but not in a way really that interacts with it negatively. So it's like this kind of awkward thing in general where it's like, you want CF up, you want it automated, but Hidden Blade is active, and Hidden Blade's only active when phasing, but I really want to be phasing, because if I'm phasing, then Hidden Blade's already active, but if I'm doing anything, I'm knocking myself out of phase, it means that my Corrupting Fever's not going to be up. Now, if we run a high-level phase run, in this case, it's a level 21 phase run, the mana cost does go up, but it only makes the mana cost, i.e. the life cost, go up to a portion where it's 76. So if we got the CDR below 10, in total, it would still only be about 150 life per second when CF's cost to re-up it is still way off from that. So there's no way I'm getting Corrupting Fever's refresh cost to the point where it's, like, acceptable off of the phase running. And that's only on a 4-link. The more supports you actually tack on to CF, which eventually is going to be 5 or 6, like an Empower, for example, makes that cost go up of how much life is needed to keep it refreshed. So you're stuck with this like duality of, yes, I could get Hidden Blade automated on a non-phasing based ascendancy, however, then I can't automate the Corrupting Fever portion of it. Alright, so there is another route that we did not discuss that is kind of kooky dooky, but let's talk about it. And that has to do with a Timeless Jewel, a Marikath Timeless Jewel, that is the Bala Bala Jewel. The Bala Bala Jewel does give us the Trader Keystone, which gives us flask charges per empty flask every 5 seconds. Now, if you run a quartz flask that is, I think, at least 32% increased duration, have it cocked so it says charges reach full, slap this bad boy on there, it will recharge fast enough, use them on full with a duration high enough that when it ticks down, it'll refresh itself before it hits the 0. 3, 2, 1, 10. Amazing. Now, we have 100% uptime of Hidden Blade without having to fiddle with phasing. So, what does this actually mean that we're getting phasing without phase run? That means we can now push Corrupting Fever or automate it and not have to worry about not being able to use an input because it's going to eat our phasing. So, we're back to door number 1. How do we automate Corrupting Fever? That gets a little trickier. We're going to slap on an Empower so it's a more realistic scenario, since I'll most likely have that in the 5-link setup with a Reap, being Reap my single target, puts Empower at a refresh mana cost of 252. And now we're at what I would describe as a realistic endgame scenario for the refresh life cost being 252. So we have to take or use 252 life worth of casting every, what is the duration? 6 seconds? I guess 8 seconds because I have things. Every 8 seconds, and if we don't do that, it's going to fall off, and if it falls off, that means I have to push a button, and if I have to push a button, I'm fucking sad. So, General's Cry, okay, plus Auto Exertion, with a level 35 Corrupting Cry, which does make this now cost life to support, at 100 life every 1.2 seconds, would be more than enough to cover it. But even unlinked, the problem is that reservation of Auto Exertion is over 100% of my mana pool still. They're fucking me, and that's only a byproduct because our Shaco is so good. So, if we used a 2020 Corrupting Cry support, instead of the God tier 35 from a Shaco, in what I describe as a much more realistic scenario, the cost of the actual General's Cry is the same at 100 life, and our Auto Exertion is still at 110%. So what that means is that mana cost doesn't go any higher than the 30, than the 20. The 30 and the 25 cost the same. Whether it's a 20 Corrupting Cry or a 35, it don't matter. It's because the way that Auto Exertion is hooking up to Corrupting Cry, it has a 1000 cost multiplier that is adding it as life instead of mana. Auto Exertion doesn't know better and just gets cranky, basically. So un-auto exerting it and just manually doing it, then yeah, it's up pretty frequently. And if I were to walk around holding Q, that would be perfectly enough to do this. But there's no way to put it on left click. You could do this And then what happens is you're stutter stepping. And if you want to accept that life, you can accept that life because you can play like this, but that's a bit maddening. Let's just accept the maddening for right now. So, General's Cry is back in my Corrupting Cry helmet. The Shaco is back on. My left click instead of walking is now General's Cry, meaning, yes, it'll automate, but I'm stagger stepping constantly. What does that look like when it comes to a map? Now we're running Vitality, Purity of Elements, just so I have res and stuff. Determination, Herald of Purity, so the only offensive aura is Herald of Purity. We have our Hidden Blade automated through our Bala Bala Maracat's Keystone with our Quartz Flask. We have our Corrupting Cry now on left click with nothing more than a General's Cry, so no DPS on that at all. Its entire existence is set up so when I hit my Corrupting Fever, my left click as I'm walking, every 2 to 3 casts, basically it's fully automating that. If I were to add more supports, the cost of the life goes up. It makes sustaining it become easier, but it also means I'm under more stress, life-wise. Now, portion of my life, 200, is, what is that, 5% of my life or something? So what you can do is you could, if you want to have it set to minimum power, that's fine. You can also grab stuff, okay, over here, like 15% recovery when we war cry, and whatever amount of life cost I spend is coming back instantly. Literally instantly coming back. Won't even see it. Alright, so back into a map we go. I'll pop in another 16, and let's see what this looks like now with this level of automation, and we've covered most of our bases, you know, we'll say. So, Corrupting Fever is up, my Bala Ball is active, my left-click stagger step Corrupting Fever is happening. You could see it applying in every which direction. Everything around me is pretty much being tagged by the various Hidden Blade things, and because it's hitting, my hemophilia is making everything bleed out, and everything's just kind of dying around me. My Corrupting Cry, hooked up to the War Cry with the fever thingy, is giving me 15% life back every 1.2 seconds, a non-negligible amount, and if I were to invest in like a Vampirism, Anoint or something, that amount of life per kill would probably cover my basis because my clear is kind of absurd in a way since it's all just happening around me. So this is becoming a real build. However, this is a lot of gimmick. This is a lot of gamesmanship for something that basically would, you know, well, it's up to you if it's worth it. So legally you can map, but this is still on the high spectrum when it comes to jank. Clear-wise, this is a great time. I'm a walking simulator when it comes to everything but things that don't die. You can get this going, but factor this into the discussion when it comes to, yeah, we've got things happening, but my god, at what cost? For the Corrupting Cry support is kind of too awkward to use because there's no way to automate since the left click change. The only way to automate is auto exertion when linked to something else like a General's Cry, which has the lowest CDR, but then the auto exertion cost of reservation gets twice the manageable amount. Even though Corrupting Cry, at level 35 in a Shaco, does reach some astonishing dot numbers for a flat value. So that kind of gets pooped on a little bit. Corrupting Fever, although perfectly fine, a part of its charm, a large portion of its charm, is its auto-refreshing. The auto-refreshing of it works well when you're using a skill to trigger it that is automatically refreshing its thing through life cost. So if that's a Kinetic Blast setup in a 405 link, whatever that might be, fantastic. If it's a Reap setup or an Exsanguinate setup that will have no problem reaching a couple hundred life within 6 seconds of casting, fantastic. But there's no way to automate that part comfortably. Auto exertion goes out the window when it comes to triggering things because the life cost gets too high because it's tied to reservation. Automation goes out the window for the same reason because you never get the values high enough. If you run a bunch of these in conjunction, now you're running too little auras, so it gets even more awkward. You start looking at the people who are doing things like the Corrupting Cries, and then they're just doing it manually because there's no way around it. All of them still end up doing things like supplemental Reap for single target because Reap is fucking fantastic, just like Exsanguinate. Those are two portions of the build that are used as either supplemental clear or supplemental single target, which kind of, it makes it a little awkward because it ends up outshining the actual entire point of the build. We're going down the niche route of trying to run Corrupting Fever or Corrupting Cry extracurricular ways like a level 35 Forbidden Shaco, only to find ourselves in a situation where the Reap setup and the Exsanguinate setup are going to ultimately outperform anything we're doing. So it becomes a little bit awkward. In terms of the Hidden Blade setups, no one is basically doing Hidden Blade anymore with CF because it's too awkward to get phasing running. And even if you do in a similar 4-link setup, it's a juggling act between where you want phasing to be active, but if you try to do something like, I don't know, hit CF again to re-up your phasing, then it eats it because you've just done a skill, and then you have to redo phasing. You could juggle that through Frenzy Charge Generation, through Blood Rage, but it's just still kind of awkward. Although Hidden Blade feels great on anybody who has phasing uptime 100%. So if that's the Mage Blood scenario with a, Mage Blood plus Quartz Flask, that's great. If you have that going, that's great. But that's just like not realistic, because if you have, for lack of a better term, if you have Mage Blood money to do the sort of stuff, I don't think you're playing Hidden Blade with a cooldown port or Hidden Blade with a Squire. So it comes back to the bog standard. Okay, I want to do CF, I want to do it with the wand version, I want to do it like the good old days, and yeah, that still works fine. The problem is you have to reach such high levels of gear to only access a fraction of our power we used to have. However, CF in the KB setup, that is great, that still works fine, but you're still constantly hit with the awkwardness of mana cost, where if you ever stop attacking, then your CF falls off. And if your CF falls off, you have to re-hit it, and that's just clunky, and you don't want to be clunky, because the whole joy of playing CF, well, it's kind of the chill part of it, Yeah, I would say that the variations of Corrupting Fever application, whether it's Cry or Hidden Blade, those are just like way too much squeeze for the juice, Like, you're just not getting the value out of it, and you're going out of your way to do something goofy. Corrupting Fever has a ton of damage. When you combine things like Hemophilia, these guys running like Gratuitous for explosions, a small amount of bleed lends yourself to have a large amount of clear, because CF ticks down things in a pack fast enough that the explosions take care of the rest. And that's kind of the same substructure of any explosion build. It's like you toss an Orias Flask in a build that has okay-ish clear, now the clear is great, and that's kind of the baseline. Whether you run a Gratuitous Violence, Flesh and Flame, or you run a Hemophilias, you're going to get a similar amount of clear. And then it comes to, what's your single target? Well, Reap single target with CF active is actually solid. You're looking at millions of damage in physical dot for single target with Reap, and that feels fine. So it becomes Reap for single target, CF with KB for clear. You could do a similar thing with just Exsanguinate, though, and that also yields a pretty similar result, and the framework of playing a champion or a juggernaut or a scion or whatever kind of works out similarly. Do you have to run 2 wands that have +2 gems and a +8 focused amulet to get to where you were 2 years ago? Yeah, I mean, slightly, but so is this build going to be one that you play to the umpteenth degree and you end up like this guy who's probably got the best CF character in all of Settlers League that's been running for a year? Yeah, you could. I don't know if all these moving parts need to necessarily work together. But I would say, as of right now, based off of looking at it, I've looked at like over 200 builds probably that use any form of CF interaction, and looking at things myself, it's kind of seems like, yeah, you could reach this zenith of power. But at the end of the day, unless you really, really, really love the build, I don't think that's the standard route of progression. I think CF is great on a 4-link, great for a first couple days, and then it's kind of time to play something better. Yeah, they're out there. You could do them. I don't know if it's really much more, like the gap from it being a really fine starter, because it's like a perfectly fine starter, to being something extraordinary is, looking like about 5 to 10 mirrors. So if you got the bank, then squeeze the juice. If not, there's a new build on aisle 3. I'll see you at the register. Bye-bye.